If you have ever had a mentor, a real one, the kind who opens doors and shares contacts and vouches for you in rooms you have not yet entered, you know what that generosity feels like. It feels like being handed a map in a city you do not know by someone who has lived there for 30 years. It feels like the specific relief of not having to figure everything out alone, of having someone who has already made the mistakes willing to help you avoid them. A good mentor gives you access to their knowledge, their network, their reputation, their credibility. And the giving is supposed to be the point. The generosity is supposed to be unconditional. You are not supposed to be giving them something back in return except your development and your eventual success, which a real mentor takes as its own reward. That is what mentorship is supposed to be. Now I want you to consider what it would mean if the person you believed was giving you a map was actually using the time you spent looking at it to make a copy of every contact in your phone. If every meeting he arranged was simultaneously an opportunity for him to introduce himself to your clients as the senior strategic partner behind your work. If every conversation in which he asked about your pipeline was less about advising you and more about identifying which relationships in your professional life were worth harvesting. If the generosity was never generosity. If it was access to you, your clients, your relationships, your trust, and he had been planning to use it from the beginning. This story starts with a young woman who believed she had found a great mentor. It ends with an industry finding out what he actually was. And the distance between those 2 points is the story. Welcome to VENOMTHREAD. This one will make you think twice about who you invite into your professional life. Her name was Simone Park, and she was 31 years old when she first encountered Raymond Ashby at an industry conference in the commercial real estate sector. She had been building her career as an independent commercial real estate advisor for 4 years, had developed a modest but solid client base, and was at the stage of professional development where the path forward was clear, but the pace felt frustratingly slow. Growing a client base in commercial real estate is a long-cycle process. Relationships take years to develop. Trust is built through repeated successful transactions and consistent follow-through and the specific kind of availability that clients feel rather than measure. Simone had been doing all of this correctly and patiently, and she was good at it. Her client retention was exceptional. Her transaction success rate was strong, and the clients she had worked with gave her referrals with a reliability that suggested genuine satisfaction. What she did not yet have was scale. She needed more relationships, more market presence, more of the visibility in the industry that translated into inbound clients rather than exclusively pursued ones. She was 27 when she started, 31 when she met Raymond Ashby, and deeply ready for someone who could help her accelerate. Raymond Ashby was 57, had been in commercial real estate for 30 years, and had a reputation in the industry that was constructed with the specific precision of someone who had understood early in their career that reputation is infrastructure and had invested in it accordingly. He was on 3 industry boards. He spoke at 4 conferences a year. He had a column in a respected industry publication in which he wrote about leadership, mentorship, and the importance of investing in the next generation of practitioners. He was, in the industry's perception, a statesman, a giver, someone who had reached the level of success that made them want to elevate others. He had mentored several younger practitioners over the years. This was documented and known and referenced in his industry profile with the specific warmth that the word mentored acquires when it appears in a professional biography. He came to Simone at the conference, not the other way around. He sought her out after a panel she had participated in, introduced himself with warmth and specificity, said he had been watching her work in the market for the past year and was impressed by the quality of the relationships she had built. He said he believed in investing in practitioners who were doing the work correctly. He said he would be glad to be a resource if she was open to it. She was open to it. She said yes. This is not a mistake she made. This is a response a reasonable and intelligent professional makes when someone with Raymond Ashby's reputation offers them exactly what they have been needing. She said yes, and the next 2 years began. The mentorship had a texture that felt right for the first 8 months. Raymond made introductions. He brought her to events she would not have been invited to independently. He connected her with 2 industry contacts who became genuine clients and who she continues to work with today. He gave her advice about positioning her practice that was specific and practical and that she followed with good results. He asked questions about her clients and her pipeline in the context of discussing how she was managing her growth, And she answered them freely because that is what you do when a mentor asks you how things are going. You tell them the truth because the truth is what they need in order to give you useful guidance. She gave him her truth for 8 months. She told him about every significant client relationship, every prospect she was cultivating, every referral source, every strategic relationship that fed her business. She shared this not because she was naive, but because the mentorship dynamic requires the mentee to share, and because she trusted him, and because nothing in the first 8 months had given her a reason not to. She shared it because mentorship only works if you are honest, and she was trying to make the mentorship work. She was doing exactly what you were supposed to do. He was doing something else entirely. The first thing she noticed was small enough that she noticed it, and then told herself she had misread it. A client named David Okafor. One of the relationships she was most proud of, a multi-property owner who had come to her through a referral and who she had developed carefully over 2 years. Mentioned in a conversation with Simone that he had recently had coffee with a senior advisor who had reached out to him directly. He mentioned it casually, the way people mention peripheral professional interactions. He mentioned Raymond's name. Simone asked how David knew Raymond. David said Raymond had reached out to him cold, had sent him a note referencing their mutual connection and suggesting they meet. David had met with him out of professional courtesy and had found him impressive and had enjoyed the conversation. He mentioned it to Simone because it seemed like a natural thing to mention. He did not understand, and Simone did not yet understand, that the only mutual connection David and Raymond had was Simone's mouth during 8 months of mentorship conversations. She processed this for several days. She concluded that it was a coincidence, that Raymond moved in the same industry circles, and that the introduction had been independently derived. This is the conclusion that a person who is not yet ready to believe what they are beginning to understand reaches when the alternative is too costly to immediately accept. The conclusion was wrong. She would understand this with considerably more certainty 4 months later. By month 12, the pattern was no longer deniable. She had identified 7 clients or high-value prospects, people whose names she had shared with Raymond in the context of discussing her business development, who had subsequently received direct outreach from Raymond. Not all of them had mentioned it to her. She had found out about 3 of them organically and about 4 others through a deliberate process of quiet inquiry she had begun after the David Okafor conversation made the coincidence explanation untenable. In each case, the pattern was structurally identical. Raymond had reached out directly, had referenced a connection to Simone without disclosing that the connection was exclusively through mentorship conversations, and had positioned himself as a senior strategic resource whose involvement would benefit the client's real estate objectives. In 2 of the 7 cases, the clients had begun using Raymond for transactions that Simone had been cultivating for over a year. She had done the work of building the relationship. Raymond had harvested it. She was 33 years old, and she had been building her practice for 6 years, and she was looking at the evidence of a systematic operation designed to use her relationship development as a sourcing mechanism for his own business. She had not been mentored. She had been mined. She sat with that word, mined, for a long time. And then she started documenting. What she built over the following 2 months was a record of the pattern organized around the specific evidence available to her. The mentorship meeting notes she had kept in a personal document she used to track the guidance she was receiving, which contained the dates on which she had described each of the 7 relationships to Raymond. The timestamps of the client outreach she had been able to confirm through her conversations with the affected clients. The 2-month gap between when she had described each relationship and when Raymond had made contact, which was consistent enough to suggest a deliberate process rather than random professional networking. She added to this record the public record of Raymond's industry activity, his conference speaking schedule, his board memberships, his published writing on mentorship, his industry profile, and she began building a picture of the professional reputation infrastructure that had made his operation possible. She was not doing this in anger, though anger was present. She was doing it with the specific, methodical focus of a person who has understood what they are dealing with and has decided to understand it completely before they decide what to do about it. She called an attorney when the documentation was complete. The attorney reviewed the record and told her that what she had documented was potentially actionable under several theories: unfair business practices, breach of fiduciary duty in the mentorship relationship, tortious interference with prospective business relationships. The attorney said, "We have a foundation." And then she said the thing that set the first twist in motion. Before we proceed, I want to search for prior instances. This kind of operation is rarely a first offense. The first twist was what the attorney's search found. Raymond Ashby had been the subject of a complaint filed with the industry's professional conduct body 8 years earlier by a practitioner named Marcus Webb, who had alleged that Raymond had used a mentorship relationship to systematically contact Marcus's client base. The complaint had been filed, investigated, and resolved in a way that the investigation records characterized as insufficient evidence for formal sanction, but that the complaint file, which the attorney obtained through a regulatory records request, characterized as concerning enough to warrant monitoring. The complaint had not been public. It had not appeared in Raymond's industry profile. It had not appeared in any of the documentation that made up his reputation as a statesman and a giver. It had been filed, noted, and buried. And Marcus Webb, who the attorney located through industry directories and who agreed to speak with Simone after a carefully worded introductory, appeared in any of the documentation that made up his reputation as a statesman and a giver. It had been filed, noted, and buried. And Marcus Webb, who the attorney located through industry directories and who agreed to speak with Simone after a carefully worded introductory message that described the situation without revealing the full scope of what Simone had found, had been out of the industry for 6 years. He had left 2 years after the complaint was dismissed. He said he had not been able to rebuild his client base after Raymond had systematically approached it. He said he had not understood, until he had already lost too much to recover, what had actually happened to him. He had not had the documentation Simone had. He had not had an attorney. He had had a feeling and a conviction and no evidence and no recourse and eventually no career. He was the first person who had been through what Simone was going through. He was the reason the second twist was possible. The second twist arrived through a client named Eleanor Crane, a commercial property developer who had been one of the 7 people Raymond had contacted after Simone described her in a mentorship session. Eleanor had not told Simone about the contact when it happened. She had not known it was relevant to tell. She told Simone about it after Simone reached out to her directly and explained, with careful and legally informed language, that she was documenting a pattern and would like to understand Eleanor's experience of Raymond's outreach. Eleanor described the outreach accurately and helpfully, and with the cooperation of someone who found the situation both surprising and plausible. And then Eleanor said something that changed the scope of what Simone was building. She said, "I have to tell you something. When I met Raymond for coffee and he was describing his work, he said something that I thought was odd at the time. He said that he had been Simone's mentor and that he had helped her develop her practice, and that he was now working with some of her more complex clients because their needs had outgrown what a solo practitioner could provide. He said this as if it were a planned arrangement, as if Simone had referred me to him, and I want you to know that I believed him when he said it." Eleanor paused. She said, "I recorded the conversation. I record all of my professional meetings as a matter of practice. I have it on my phone right now." Simone was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I would like to hear it." The recording was 11 minutes and 43 seconds long. In those 11 minutes and 43 seconds, Raymond Ashby described the mentorship relationship with Simone in terms that positioned himself as the senior partner whose strategic guidance had been the foundation of everything she had built, described several of her key client relationships as having been seeded by introductions he had facilitated when the truth was the opposite, and described his outreach to Eleanor as part of an ongoing effort to support Simone's practice by providing elevated service to her most sophisticated clients. He had constructed a narrative in which his theft was generosity, and Simone's 6 years of independent work was the output of his stewardship. He had told this story confidently and in detail to a client he believed would never compare notes with Simone. He was wrong. Simone listened to the 11 minutes and 43 seconds twice. She thanked Eleanor. She sent the audio file to her attorney the same afternoon. Her attorney called her the following morning and said 4 words. "This changes the math." What had been a civil case with moderate exposure for Raymond was now a case with a recorded statement in which he had made specific false representations to a client about the nature of his relationship with Simone and the origin of her practice. Defamation. False representation. The civil complaint that had been in draft was substantially revised. The exposure for Raymond was now significant, and his attorney, when he was served, advised him to settle. Raymond chose not to settle. This was the worst decision Raymond Ashby made in a career full of decisions that had been excellent for him and destructive for others. The third twist arrived after Raymond refused to settle and the litigation became a matter of public record. In commercial real estate, litigation between industry practitioners is news, not front-page news, but the kind of news that circulates through the professional community with the speed of information that everyone finds relevant to their own professional lives. The complaint, which was filed with Eleanor's recording attached as an exhibit, was reviewed by the industry professional conduct body that had received Marcus Webb's complaint 8 years earlier. The body opened a new investigation. The existence of the investigation and the attachment of a prior complaint to the new investigation triggered a review of Raymond's industry board memberships. 2 of the 3 boards he sat on placed his membership under review pending the investigation's outcome. The conference where he had been scheduled to deliver a keynote on ethical mentorship practices, a keynote he had been announced for 3 months earlier on the conference website, quietly removed his name from the speaker list without public explanation. His column in the industry publication was suspended pending the investigation's outcome. The industry profile that had described him as a statesman and a giver began to read, in light of the publicly available complaint, as a document that had been constructed to facilitate exactly the kind of operation Simone had documented. The infrastructure of his reputation, which he had spent 30 years building precisely because reputation was infrastructure, was dismantling itself using the publicly available information that had now been introduced into the record. He had built his reputation carefully enough that its collapse was proportionate to its construction. Every pillar he had erected became a pillar supporting the wrong structure when the structure's true purpose was visible. The litigation settled 14 months after filing, 3 months before the scheduled trial date, under circumstances that Simone's attorney described as reflecting the complete absence of a defensible position once Eleanor Crane's recording was in evidence and Marcus Webb had provided a corroborating witness statement. The settlement was confidential in its financial terms and will remain so. What Simone negotiated the right to say, and she negotiated specifically and carefully for this right, was that the settlement had been reached, that it had been reached to her satisfaction, and that the 2 clients who had transitioned to Raymond during the operation had subsequently returned to her practice. The professional conduct investigation concluded 2 months after the settlement with findings that resulted in Raymond's suspension from practice for a period the body described as appropriate to the severity and duration of the conduct and the existence of a prior complaint. The suspension was public. His name appeared in the body's published discipline notices under a heading that would be associated with his name in any professional search conducted by anyone in the industry for as long as the record was maintained. He did not appeal the suspension. His attorney advised that an appeal would require a formal hearing at which Eleanor Crane's recording would be played and Marcus Webb would testify in person. Raymond chose not to appeal. Simone rebuilt. This word, rebuilt, does not capture what actually happened because what she rebuilt was not what she had before Raymond Ashby entered her professional life. What she rebuilt was better, not because the experience had made her harder or more suspicious. She is neither of those things, and she resists both characterizations with a specific clarity, but because the documentation discipline she had developed during the 2 months she spent building the record before engaging an attorney had fundamentally changed how she managed her practice. She understood now, with the precision that only experience inside a system's failure provides, what professional relationships require in terms of documentation and what professional generosity requires in terms of appropriate limits on disclosure. She shared less in professional contexts that did not require full disclosure. She documented more. She verified independently before extending full access. She was not less generous. She was more precise about what generosity required and what it did not. And she began, not as a campaign, not as an organized effort, just as the natural extension of being someone who talks to people in her industry and who now had specific and hard-won knowledge about a specific and hard-to-detect form of professional predation, to share what she had learned about documentation with younger practitioners who came to her with the kind of question she had not known to ask at 31. She became, in other words, the thing Raymond Ashby had pretended to be, a mentor, generously, without agenda, with the specific understanding that the gift of a mentor is the gift of their experience, including the experience of what can go wrong. and that the only thing a mentee owes a genuine mentor is their own eventual success. I asked Simone what she wished she had known at 31 that she knows now. She thought about it for a long time. She said, "I wish I had known that generosity in a professional context is not the same thing as open access. I thought that being a good mentee meant being fully transparent. I thought that withholding anything, any information about my clients, my pipeline, my relationships, would be a form of bad faith that would undermine the mentorship. I had been taught that mentorship requires trust, and that trust requires transparency, and I applied that framework without understanding that it has a limit." She said, "Genuine mentors do not need the names of your clients in order to guide you. They need to understand your challenges and your patterns and your growth areas. A mentor who asks for client details is not asking because they need that information to help you develop. They are asking because they want the information. Full stop." She paused. She said, "Raymond Ashby spent 30 years building a reputation as someone who invested in the next generation. And the investment was real in the sense that he gave his mentees something. He gave them his time and his introductions and his credibility. But the return he expected on that investment was not their success. It was their Rolodex. He called it networking. I call it what it was. Thank you for being here on VENOMTHREAD tonight. If someone is mentoring you right now, ask yourself whether the questions they ask about your clients and your pipeline are questions that need answers in order to guide your development, or questions that need answers for some other reason entirely. The answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. New Darkness drops next week, and we are nowhere near done.